This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. With its fast-burning activity and long-lasting systemic action, Intruvix 2 herbicide delivers consistent pre-seed broadleaf control in cereals. It's fast and it lasts. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. I'm calling it Tariff Eve. I'm not sure if the panel's going to like that tagline, but it's kind of Tariff Eve around here, as it's the last day of January. Hard to believe. And we got a lot of news happening this week and leading into the weekend. We don't have all the details yet. That's what's really making, I think, a lot of people very uncomfortable in terms of what could be as it applies to President Trump's intentions on tariffs. We've got to talk about that. We've got to talk about a whole lot more things that happened this week as well. We've also got time today for the beef market update with Anne Wasko, so she'll be here. We're going to talk to her about what's the latest in the cattle markets. They have been steamy. They've been hot. They have been really on a ride. What is in store for the next 11 months of the year, or at least maybe in the short term, from what she can tell from her analysis. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Had a great week in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia on Monday, St. John's, Newfoundland on Wednesday. Next week, I am in Cambridge, Ontario on Tuesday, Regina, Saskatchewan on Wednesday, and Camrose, Alberta on Thursday. 3 cities, 3 days. Looking forward to it. And really excited this weekend about being in Tucson, Arizona to watch my oldest son play opening weekend for Division II baseball. So that's going to be a great time as well. Looking forward to this weekend. There'll be some sunshine too. Some sunshine will be great. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, right after this.
I'm the kind of guy who enjoys his freedom. Sure, I have a wife, kids, and a mortgage. But now I have new on-deck herbicide for wheat and barley. Thanks to a unique combination of actives, it delivers both superior control of tough weeds like kochia and proactive resistance management with, listen to this, complete rotational freedom. You can't tie this wild stallion down. Spray for today, plan for tomorrow with new on-deck herbicide. Visit your retailer or Corteva.ca to learn more.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Before we get on to the RealAg Issues panel to discuss all the issues of the week and what the weekend could lead to, we're going to get to the beef market update. But first, I want to tell you about coming up here February 12th and 13th very quickly at the Victoria Inn and Convention Center in Winnipeg. It is the 2025 Crop Connect Conference. You got a great list of speakers, crop-specific information, networking, and more. You can register today at cropconnectconference.ca. Real Agriculture's own Jason Strovey and Kelvin Heppner will be on location. They're setting up a studio in the reception area where you get your coffee and your food and your donuts and all that kind of fun stuff. So make sure you stop by the studio there live on location and you say hello. Let's get to the beef market update with Anne Wasko with the Gateway Livestock Exchange, and nothing to talk about today.
No, absolutely nothing. Good day, Shaun.
Okay, now we have seen quite the run in prices. Last week I wrote about the cattle on feed report and getting over the live cattle futures in the near months over $200 for fat cattle in the futures market. What happened this week from a cash perspective?
Well, futures continued that run earlier this week. Now they've certainly set back, but what a run it has been. So the last couple of days futures have been off, but cash cattle in the south, of course, had to catch up to what happened in the north last week. So Texas and Kansas this week were 208 on the live market. So compared to where they traded early last week, that's $6 higher for the most part. That's kind of where Nebraska got to at the end of the week. So Nebraska's trading 330 delivered at my last look, which would be called steady with last week. So what an amazing run. And this has been cash led. Futures have been following. So that's one of kind of the strongest signs of a solid market. Now, the cutout did show signs of weakening here in the second half of the week. It closed last night at 327.5 on the choice, $3.5 lower. Select's back about 1160. So, bit not surprising seasonally, not surprising from the fact that it's made this massive run at a time when you wouldn't normally see wholesale prices as strong as they've been. So those things aren't that unexpected, if you will. Now, cash markets in Alberta also had some catch up to do. Yes, they've been moving higher, but basis has still remained really wide, really weak. So cash cattle in Alberta this week were 460 delivered dressed. That's going to be called 10 to 15 higher on a dress basis. But again, needed to catch up a little bit from a basis perspective. Last week, spot basis was $35 back of the U.S. and to the nearby live cattle, it was $20 back. So we needed to narrow those gains a little bit. Now, we've got some reports coming up. If you want to talk about those right now, we do have the U.S. cattle inventory report for January 1. They didn't have one, if you recall, last summer, Shaun, because they had budget cutbacks, USDA did. So we haven't had one of these reports since last January. So this is the one that'll go through, and this comes out this afternoon. It'll go through all the various costs of cattle, but I'll give you just some of the key trade guesses that I'll be watching. So all cattle and calves, everything. Industry analysts are calling it down 1%. The calf crop, they're calling down 1.5%. If that were to come true, just to put it in perspective, that would be the smallest calf crops in the U.S. since 1940.
Wow.
Yeah. Beef cows expecting down 1%. And beef replacements, heifers, they're expecting up 1%, but it's interesting because there's several analysts that take part in this survey from a guess perspective, and some are expecting lower, some are expecting higher. So there's not consensus from the trade in terms of what's happening with replacement heifers. Now, you talked last week about the on-feed report for the U.S. For January 1, and it just, again, continues to show numbers awfully similar to a year ago. On-feed numbers were down 1%. But we did see that December placements down 3%, likely still had a lot to do with, remember, the Mexican border is still closed for feeder cattle imports into the U.S. because of the screwworm issue. And so that affected December, and it's still closed today. So I expect when we do see next month's cattle on feed report for the U.S., we will also see January placements impacted still by the fact that we haven't got Mexican feeder cattle coming north. So that's coming out later today, something to watch for.
Yeah. So we're also going to have an update, I believe, from President Sheinbaum in Mexico about giving an update on the screwworm situation. There's still there has to be an impact here on Mexican feeder cattle not coming into states like, into the U.S., but impacting states like Nebraska and Texas. What are you hearing from people south of the border on that one?
Well, certainly, I guess the question now going forward is most were expecting it not to last too terribly long into January. So I guess if we don't see something changing, and I am hearing that we will see, and it'll be interesting to see what is said in that update today. But how much longer will it be? So I think up until now, the industry's kind of dealt with it. The Mexican cattle have kind of just stayed where they were. But now it's starting to dig into, okay, we thought this would be open by now. So if it carries on much longer, I think there's more impactful. We've seen it impact the placement numbers already in Texas and Kansas, December and January. They'll catch up if it opens soon. If it doesn't, then we have another discussion about, some significant changes on the supply side.
Yeah, if some of those cattle that were intended to come north are now on feed, you got to wonder, will they actually come north, and will it leave some of those pens empty?
Various opinions there, Shaun. Some just saying they're still staying out, on pasture, if you will, and they just stay there until they, so it's not as, if we were exporting feeder cattle from Canada, it would be a different deal because they would be in feedlots. So this, I think, situation's maybe a little bit different in terms of they're still out at pasture and grass. Yeah.
And of course, at the time of recording this, and I give that update because it's a fast-moving environment, there is an expectation that there is going to be a 25% tariff on Canadian exports. Now, a lot of talk is about, will there be a cutout for Canadian energy? Nobody's talking about any sort of an exemption for beef or cattle. So if these tariffs are put in place on Saturday, February 1st, then that is going to be a big shakeup on these markets. We don't know what we don't know. What is actually going to happen? But what are some things to look out for? What could be some of the potential impacts?
Well, two things. Well, first of all, lots of things. I shouldn't say two things. I was going to mention two things, but there's lots of things going on. We talked before we got on the call, of course, about the Canadian dollar, and it has been sensing tariffs since the initial word was thrown out back last fall. But even here this morning, we've got the March dollar, and again, was coming down as I got on the call here, but 68.85. Yeah. That's down a full cent even just from last Friday. So, the dollar has certainly been moving. That, of course, over the last 2 or 3 months has been very supportive to Canadian cattle prices. But now, of course, I suspect it's starting to really look at the impacts of tariffs, and that's therefore the weakness. So we'll see what happens. That's one thing. The other thing that's been interesting to watch, Shaun, in Western Canada for sure, has been producers have been marketing cattle. They've been, selling early. Our auction market volumes in Alberta in January are huge. We had another 42,000 head move through Alberta markets last week. That was following a 46,000 head one the week before that. If it's another big week this week when the numbers come in, and it will be, we could be up as much as 50 to 54% from last January just in what's moving. So producers are doing what they can to get ahead of what might or might not happen, that unknown. And I suspect, I don't know for sure from livestock price insurance, but I suspect there's been a lot of activity in terms of buying price insurance for the rest of this year.
Yeah. Like Canadian, as that corn price creeps up and the Canadian dollar creeps down, cost of feed going up for Canadian feed yards that are feeding corn,
that are bringing in U.S. corn. Yeah. So there could be so many things change, Shaun, and I guess we'll hear more in probably less than 24 hours.
I feel like it's a working weekend. I just have this feeling it's a working weekend.
I think you better get ready for it. And I know I'm going to see Lyndsey down at NCBA in San Antonio next week, so that'll be good to catch up with her. Sorry, we're going to miss you, but yeah, it'll be interesting to be in the midst of the U.S. Cattlemen's meeting.
You think?
NCBA. It'll be very interesting. Really, of course, my highlight of course, the Cattle Facts Outlook session, which is next Thursday. So
it's always a highlight. CattleCon is one of my favorite meetings to go to. So many friends in that media room and the industry, and honestly, NCBA truly does make it just a great opportunity to get the insights of so many people across the cattle sector, not only their staff, but the entire industry. So Lyndsey's going to be there. She's going to have a great time. You make sure, Anne, you do not lead her astray and end up at Howl at the Moon on Riverwalk in the middle. Yeah, she has work to do. You do not lead that woman astray. I've left her in the hands of somebody I'm not sure I should have. I can.
What happens in San Antonio?
Well, y'all have a good time. And thanks so much for joining us here. Have a great time at CattleCon down there in San Antonio, Texas, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Okay, thanks, Shaun.
Okay, we're going to be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, with the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, and Lyndsey Smith joining us right after this. Lima Grain Cereal Seed brings you best-in-class performance for winter and spring wheat, including 12 national wheat yield contest winners in 2024. With the most extensive coaxium portfolio and over 15 top-performing varieties, Lima Grain delivers superior genetics to control grassy weeds when you need it, fall or spring. Boost your yield potential today. Visit limagraincerealseeds.com or call your LCS Regional Commercial Manager for more info.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 on Tariff Eve. It is great to be with you here today on this Friday. Lyndsey, what?
Just keep going. We'll start. It's fine.
You don't like that?
I don't like Tariff Eve.
You don't like Tariff Eve?
No, I don't.
Huh. Well,
continue.
Is there a Boxing Day in this scenario? Maybe
that remains to be seen. Really?
We will find out, I guess. Hey, manage weeds early in your canola cereals and pulse rotations with Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. All of this is powered by Duplasm technology, advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed burn down from New Farm. Whoever is naming these products at New Farm needs a raise. They're doing an exceptional job. You can find out more by going to newfarm.ca. Let's bring the panel. Well, you've already heard from Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you?
I've had better weeks, I'll be honest.
What's wrong?
Oh, just, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Other than that, everything's cool.
We have stuff
so
to
it's great.
Like, the news keeps on coming. Mm-hmm. Like, there's weeks where we sit here and we're just like, oh, man, what are we going to write about? Not this week.
Not this week. Oh, no, friends. There's so much. Anyway, no. Things are okay. It's cold. But that's okay. We're in sort of, as far as the sheep flock goes, this is like maintenance mode, so that's all good.
Okay.
But we did have our first snow day this week for our kids, and I want to send my heart out to friends of mine in Grey County who have had 18 snow days already. The snow, if everybody is following along on social media, those old timey pictures of like the wall of snow that you have to drive through. That's what Grey County has right now. So sorry about your luck, Grey County. Oh yeah, they've had just lake effect snow, storm after storm.
18 since when though?
Since that's a good question. At least this school year, but I actually think they basically have not gone in January for the most part.
Wow.
They had a few before Christmas. Yeah.
Wow.
So sorry about your luck, Grey County.
Also joining us is, somebody from a pretty snowy place. He appreciates winter more than anybody else I know. He has also taught me more about the poultry industry than I will ever learn from anybody else. Everything I know about poultry is through Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
I'm doing well, but I'm kind of with Lyndsey. I've been fighting back the grumpiness this week. Try to keep it away from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you, Kelvin. Misery loves company.
Sometimes it's me that brings the little bit of the grit here, and really, we're going to get some fabulous takes out of the panel today. Also rounding it out is the man of reason and analysis and thought-provoking takes. It is Tyler McCann. He is managing director at CAPI, based out of, don't hold this against him, everybody, Quebec. Hey, Tyler, how are you?
I'm great, Shaun, but I'm disappointed that you're playing the fake media news again today, calling this Tariff Eve when apparently we've got another month. So, it's one thing for you to be alarmist and to be scaring all of the listeners out there, Shaun, but don't be the fake news.
Okay, what are you hearing? What's going on?
Reuters reporting that sources close to Trump are saying the tariffs are coming March 1st. So, Shaun, I don't know what you're talking about and kind of this panic that you're trying to spread across the country.
This means I was correct. You talked amongst yourselves while I pull up the tweet that is timestamped to yesterday for what I said.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but Kelvin, up until this news that Tyler is breaking, what did we think was going to happen tomorrow? What were we told was going to happen tomorrow?
We had no idea, and even now, I think this is a little bit of that. This is a premature victory lap here, Shaun, because remember George Bush on the U.S. Navy ship there declaring the war was over? Whatever.
Oh, in Iraq, yeah. Ooh, that didn't go very well.
We don't know for sure yet. Trump could still change his mind. It depends who last talks to him before he goes to bed tonight or something like that. I don't know. That's the issue here. There's so many different scenarios, and that uncertainty is certainly causing a lot of damage already north of the border.
Well, just honestly, I agree. So I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think the threat of tariffs has really created an impact on the psyche of the business community in Canada. I got that very much so from Crop Production Show. I got that this week when I was in Atlantic, Canada. The threat. Now, I think you can only go to this so many times. It's sort of like, hey, I'm getting a divorce. You know what? I'm getting a divorce. If you don't clean up your act, I'm getting a divorce. We're kind of in that stage. And at some point, it's sort of like, yeah, whatever. Like, get your divorce. Like, not that I've been through that situation.
I'm calling Trish as you speak.
You're calling Trish. So here's what I think it's kind of numbing, right? It's sort of like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. Like at some point you're like, yeah, we know what you did the last 3 times. It's all good. Here's what I tweeted yesterday. And I think this is a reasonable idea of what is taking place here. And this is yesterday, 18 hours ago from recording here. I'm still hoping the showman President Trump is making the tariff announcement today, which was Thursday, 2 days before February 1st, to rescind by his deadline after Homan and Jolie meet Friday. It's possible that he says he forced Canada and Mexico to make some changes, which are already announced, the $1.3 billion, for example. Everybody wins. Tyler, is that what happened here?
I don't know. I think that the framing isn't clear. I'm not sure kind of that Homan, Jolie reference, maybe that is what they will say publicly. At the end of the day, I think this is the case with this all along. Nobody really knows what's driving this. Nobody really knows what's driving changes in decisions. And we are all just left playing the guessing game as to what will bring the tariffs on or off and what Canada can or cannot do in order to avoid the chaos and the economic harm that will come on both sides of the border from these tariffs.
Exactly what Tyler's saying. This week we saw Howard Lutnick say it's about fentanyl. And then you have all the people, the economics-minded people around Trump, Navarro, Lighthizer, Oren Cass, saying it's about the trade deficit. That's the challenge here for Canada, is that we don't know what we're negotiating here, or what the U.S., what the Trump administration wants.
So what do you do then? Like, besides the fact the entire Canadian business community, Lyndsey, should just buy some condo buildings in Washington, D.C. because they're going to be living there, having to go through this repeated circus over and over and over and over again.
So, first of all, above my pay grade to say what we should do, but I have thoughts, and I think some of those thoughts are things that have been discussed last week, this week, etc. For one, I would just like to point out that if the powers that be had been listening to this radio show for the past, 18 months, they probably would have heard that they should have been preparing for this a long time before now. It does feel a little like scrambly. At the same time, I think that we have to be very honest with the immediate ramifications of the threat of these tariffs. And that is something we've seen this week. We're seeing businesses that are perhaps delaying investment or cutting back or trying to essentially manage risk, right? That's really what it comes down to. You're trying to manage risk. And in a volatile environment, that's very difficult. But in a volatile environment, you try to minimize your exposure to some of the downsides. So we're already seeing that. So the second part of this, I think that I want to see is something that we did see discussed by some researchers, some columnists, et cetera, is that Canada essentially, we cannot as you said, Shaun, constantly be trying to guess what this president is going to do. There are things that Canada can do, should do for Canada, regardless of what the U.S. does, that we need to be focused on and we need to move forward on, and we need to move quickly, because I think we've got 4 more years. This is week 2, everybody. We've got stuff that we just need to take care of our own. Let's put it that way.
Well, as a news person, this is kind of the gift that keeps on giving. To Kelvin's point, I think it's important, as of us recording the show here, Reuters is saying that U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to announce new tariffs against Canada and Mexico that will begin on March 1st, but will include a process for the countries to seek specific exemptions for certain imports, 3 people familiar with planning told Reuters. So they have, he has not officially made that announcement yet. So, things, of course, can change. What we have heard, though, we released some brand new RealAgristudies data, and I think Canadian farmers are pretty concerned about some of the potentials here of a trade war and tariffs and things like that on exports. 88% of farmers say they are very or somewhat concerned about the impact of tariffs on the overall Canadian economy, with only 3% saying not very concerned. Now, when we look at specific impacts on their farming operations, 59% of respondents expect the proposed Trump tariffs will negatively impact their business. Only 7% feel they will have no effect. And I want to dig into who those 7% are and better understand that demographic. Another 7% don't know if there will be any impact, so they don't know. That's fair. And 27% see a possible impact of the Trump tariffs on their farm business. So clearly, Lyndsey, people are seeing they're concerned about it.
Well, and I'm glad to see this. It doesn't necessarily entirely jive with many moons ago we asked how important trade is to your business, and a lot of farmers said, they didn't think it was that important. And I thought, and we sort of scratched our head at that. I think, if anything, what we're going through now certainly does put a point on just how important trade is overall. So not just your individual commodity or commodities that you grow, but to our industry as a whole. So I think that plays in. One of the other data points in there that we asked about was, of course, how you feel about making investments in your farm business. I think the question is now a good time to invest in the farm business? It was very negative at 53. Yeah. So 100 is neutral, 53, incredibly negative sentiment. I think 73% said absolutely not.
Yeah, and back in October, we were on our way up. We were increasing,
that's right.
And now we're up back down.
So. And so I think that does just show just how quickly, yes, things can change in a volatile environment. But it does certainly show just the cloud that hangs over our country and our industries right now from all of this. And this is where I am a sort of action person, sometimes to my detriment. And so I sort of feel like I don't want to be beholden to Trump across the board and his whims and whoever talked to him, as Kelvin says, before he goes to bed. I would like to see some very real action from Canada on just what's best for Canada and move forward there.
Yeah, but I don't think you can do that without considering...
You have to consider it, but I mean things like investing in our own infrastructure, in exporting to other places, et cetera. I recognize that we are fully tied to the U.S. Economy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not an idiot. I don't think that we can suddenly ignore the U.S. I just mean we need to spend time devising what Canada needs to do for Canada that is independent of what the U.S. does.
Like Energy East? Talking to you out there in Quebec, Tyler.
Yep.
Well, Shaun, but Shaun, I think it also should be about how do we take some of that potash we're exporting to the United States and send it somewhere else instead?
But we do send it all over the world.
But 80% of the potash that U.S. farmers use is Canadian potash. So how do we help them understand that this idea of a north-south market and kind of the benefits of Canada and the U.S. working together really do work both ways. And this is where you get into the real kind of tough choices that are facing Canadians and Canadian governments is how do you make the Americans feel the consequences of the decisions they're going to make? And it does involve things like oil. Like how do we make gas more expensive for U.S. consumers if they're out to destroy the Canadian economy? How do we make potash more expensive for U.S. farmers because they're out to destroy the Canadian economy? There needs to be consequences that are felt by Americans because of the things that they're going to do to Canada. And let's be really super clear on this, right? Canada is a great partner for the United States. We are not someone out manipulating our currency. We're not someone out unfairly subsidizing our businesses. Maybe we've got an issue on dairy or softwood lumber, but we've got a pretty good track record of managing those issues. We are a great partner, but if they are going to do this, if they're going to force us to live under a cloud of threat and the fear of persecution for years, that there going to need to be actions. And again, I think U.S. farmers will feel that. And I think potash is a really good example where some of that infrastructure money should be spent so that we can ship that potash somewhere else and the Americans can figure it out.
You know, I was thinking this week when I was in Atlantic Canada, how, like, at this point, can we just reflect on how big of a joke and how naive we were when we were talking about Bill 282 and what that potentially would protect Canada from? Like, I don't know. Is that...
No, so I think that's really legitimate. I mean, 282 was a bad bill. I think that the kind of the broad consensus outside of those directly involved in supply management is that it was a bad bill. It would serve no purpose. But we also have to understand, right? Like, we can't just roll over and give up our supply managed sectors because the Americans are in a bad mood. Like, the Americans have a very protected sugar market. They have a very protected agriculture market. They have a very protected dairy market themselves, right? So this shouldn't be this idea that we give up whatever because, you know, they're bigger than we are. What we need is real negotiations, and we need to be able to go back and forth, and we need to be able to work together to figure out what those win-win solutions are. And we have 100 years or more now of history of finding win-win solutions for Canada and the U.S., and we need more of a focus on that again.
Okay, we got to take a break. Hey, with volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be a part of the solution. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Visit genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, RealAg Issues Panel, right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Oh, if only you could hear the discussion during the commercial breaks, everybody. Maybe that needs to be like, no, it doesn't. Actually, It does not even need to be that, what I was just going to say. Hey, FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farmers, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's dynamic portfolio of seed and to contact your local territory manager, gain a genetic advantage, and experience the next wave with FP Genetics. We got Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, Tyler McCann of CAPI. Now, this is just a day where like I said, the gift just keeps on giving. Now we've got news about the capital gains changes that the federal government's been, I guess, CRA's been implementing. We do not have the legislation passed. We've had the Conservatives say they're going to repeal it. What is the Liberals saying now, Kelvin?
Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc this morning announced that they are going to delay the implementation of that inclusion rate increase that farm groups, farmers, and business organizations across the country have been pushing against. Farm groups have been calling for a reversal here. This is just a delay, not a reversal. So LeBlanc said that instead of implementing it or administering it as if it's in effect since last June, which is what CRA, as you mentioned, has been doing, they're going to kick that deadline down the road to January 1st, 2026. In the meantime, though, they are going to keep the increase to the lifetime capital gains exemption at $1.25 million effective last June, as well as some of the entrepreneurs incentive and a few other changes that were made to the capital gains last year. So, yeah, like you said, the legislation hasn't been introduced. The Ways and Means motion was introduced in Parliament, and that's what Canada Revenue Agency had been using as justification for enforcing it. And now the question is, it's delayed, but what needs to happen for it to be completely reversed and not take effect on January 1st of next year? The Conservatives, Polyev, have said that they would reverse the changes. And Tyler, maybe you can speak to this. I think it requires another Ways and Means motion before Parliament to officially get the CRA to change course on it.
I think that's probably what needs to happen, but I would imagine it would get dealt with under a change of government. Worth noting that it's not just the Conservatives. In fact, the former Liberal finance minister who brought this forward has actually distanced herself from this as well. But it's worth really giving a shout out to the good work of Kyle and the grain growers team that have been pretty aggressive on this. You had Kyle on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about the work that they're doing, and again, a good example of why it pays to have good, strong farm groups in this country that can lead efforts against things like this.
Yeah, I guess what happened? Like, Lyndsey,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's my question, I guess. All right. So what do we know though now? This was implemented June 25th. There, like, sales have happened and things have gone through. I mean, there was a rush to get some deals done before. Now things have happened after. What happens, Kelvin? Do we have an idea of what happens with any deals that happen after the fact?
Well, in some cases, the actual tax year, those taxes, the filing deadlines maybe haven't happened yet in a lot of cases. So, but I do expect that there will be, like they say, Finance Canada says the CRA will be enforcing this under the old rules going forward as of today. So that to me means that there could be some refunds, adjustments here in terms of tax bills that have been paid over since June of last year. But yeah, it's all kind of up in the air, and I think everybody's waiting for clarity from, and certainly accountants will have their work cut out here in terms of getting answers and conveying those answers to their clients.
Accounting question. What happens if you had done a transaction, you haven't gone through your year end yet? Can you reverse that transaction without some sort of tax penalty?
That'll be a matter of the contracts. Like, it'll be very difficult to reverse a land sale or an asset sale like that.
When a share sale, farm transition, that kind of thing.
Oh, potentially, if both parties are on board and it could be to the benefit of both parties, you could probably reverse that. But I'm sure you have to go through all the legal hoops of basically undoing it.
Oh, boys, there's going to be some accountants that get some very angry phone calls. You suggested I do this transaction because the government was making this change by this date.
Well, I mean, as they shrink from view. In fairness, though, it's CRA. We want it, like, as individuals and as accountants, you have to advise your clients based on what the rules are, and CRA moved forward with it June 25th. So the fact that it gets delayed, they haven't repealed it, it just gets delayed, you would still have to continue as if it were in place. That's not, anyway, but it does suck, and I know Tyler wants to hop in here, but like, there are some deals that probably got done that maybe people felt compelled to follow through on that maybe they wouldn't have if this wasn't hanging over them. That's a bit of a bummer, but anyway, it's a mess.
It just increased the cost. Now I got to go back to my accountant and get advice on how I. Anyway, go ahead, Tyler.
I mean, it's just, I think, another example of why we need governments that work better. And sometimes, there's like these. I mean, this is a pretty egregious example, but it's one of many examples where governments just seem disconnected from the reality of how everybody else does business or operates. Again, we're seeing this a bit on steroids with the changes going on in the United States now, but there is really something to be said for governments that can do the basic things, like clearly communicate the tax environment behind it. Instead, we've lived through almost a year now of this uncertainty. But across the board on so many issues, the inability of a government to clearly articulate what it's doing, why it's doing, and then implement and follow through on it is really quite something. Now, conversely, I think it is important to acknowledge, I think that there is acknowledgement inside the government that the situation and circumstances have changed. And we should probably, again, give credit where credit is due and saying they probably should have come to this decision a long time ago. but at least they did come to a decision in recognizing that this is a space where we cannot be discouraging investment in Canada today. We cannot be chasing money out of this country at a time when the Americans are doing a good job of that anyways.
Well, Carney says he's going to get rid of the carbon tax. We've got Freeland saying she's going to get rid of the carbon tax. Like, all of a sudden, the Liberal Party has figured out, maybe we got to move more to the center here.
Well, I think what Carney's saying is he's going to kind of shuffle some things around and spend a whole bunch more money on things, which when you look at the state of the government's finances, I'm not sure that's that much better of an outcome for the country anyways.
Yeah. Well, here's another one on the carbon file. RBC has quit the climate group as Canada's top bank follows some of Wall Street. So they've pulled out of this climate banking syndicate. They were sort of a syndicate of one. So Bloomberg is reporting that RBC is now pulled out of that as well. So
and maybe that's one of the reasons Carney's seeking the Liberal leadership, because his net zero banking alliance efforts have fallen apart and he needs to go do something else instead.
Oh, I like the tale you just wove, Tyler.
Maybe we should give Kelvin an opportunity for a rebuttal to defend the interests of the Liberal Party. Kelvin, do you want to get in there?
No, I have no comment.
This is so much fun today.
Well stated.
There's just shots being fired all over the place.
Yeah.
Hey, this segment brought to you by Alpine Liquid Fertilizers, your full season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Make sure you check out Nature's Alpine.
Before we continue, I do have a question. 400,000 names on the Liberal voter list. Tyler, did you use your real name or a fake name? Because they say they're checking.
Kelvin, unlike members of the media, I'm in a nonpartisan organization and we don't take political stances.
Unlike members of the... However, your cows, Tyler, may be able to join said list. So if there's like a bluebell and what, just check.
They're verifying now, though, over the next month.
They are verifying. Yeah.
Good. Kelvin knows a lot about what the Liberals are doing in their nomination races.
You know, we're really testing the audience's ability to detect the level of sarcasm used by the host and guest today, and we are going to spur a lot of different emails, and it's going to be fun to read those next week here on the panel. We've got to take a break. We'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues Panel right after. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues Panel with Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147. You know, we talked about the tariff situation earlier. Like most things can change. And make sure you go to RealAgriculture.com over Saturday and Sunday and into Monday and keep up to date if the issue on tariffs does change. We'll have the latest and greatest on the situation based on what we know at that time. And the Saturday email is going to be all dedicated to some of the impacts on tariffs. We got more on that tariff study, what farmers have been saying in terms of the impact, how should Canada respond, and a great conversation. Unbiased. I had a conversation with Jacob Shapiro of Cognitive Investments Frontlines podcast, where we talk about relations between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. If you don't get our Saturday email, you can do it. You can get it by going to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Encourage you with lots of different emails that we send out. Also want to mention SGS, delivering reliable agricultural lab testing for your crops, soil, feed, water, and seed. SGS Canada is uniquely positioned and ready to elevate your business in Canada and the United States. Call them at 1-800-952-5407. That's 1-800-952-5407. Okay, resident poultry expert Kelvin Heppner on our panel. Like I said, everything I know about poultry is based on, I have two things. Everything I know about biofuels, Chip Flory. Everything I know about poultry, Kelvin Heppner. Kelvin, this week, HPAI really was center stage at the first press briefing by new White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. There's a lot of concern in the U.S. about the price of eggs, for example. They've gone up like 30+% or 39% or something like that. I may have what I have in my memory. A lot of concern about it. President Trump has promised that he is going to lower grocery prices. And there was a connection made between depopulation of birds due to HPAI and egg prices. Now, that connection definitely does exist, but there was a real question from her on why these depopulations were happening, and were they the Biden administration applying inflationary policy? Let's hear what she said, and I want to get your response, because you're living this as a poultry producer.
The cost of everything, not just eggs, bacon, groceries, gasoline, have increased because of the inflationary policies of the last administration. As far as the egg shortage, what's also contributing to that is that the Biden administration and the Department of Agriculture directed the mass killing of more than 100 million chickens, which has led to a lack of chicken supply in this country, therefore a lack of egg supply, which is leading to the shortage. So I will leave you with this point. This is an example of why it's so incredibly important that the Senate moves swiftly to confirm all of President Trump's nominees, including his nominee for the United States Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, who is already speaking with Kevin Hassett, who's leading the economic team here at the White House, on how we can address the egg shortage in this country.
Okay, so that was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, and Brooke Rollins, who is the candidate or the nominee for the USDA secretary, highly likely to be confirmed. I think it's like 99% probability based on some of the betting pools. Kelvin, based on what you heard there, what's your response?
I'm quite disappointed. She is an excellent communicator in terms of conveying, speaking to the media, and she's shown that here in her first week, but after lecturing the media on telling the truth, minutes later to hear misinformation like that coming from her, that the Biden administration directed the mass killing of 100 million chickens. The disease is called Highly Pathogenic Avian Influenza. Highly pathogenic. These birds, a bunch of them died from the virus. And then as part of the effort to stop more birds from dying, USDA intervenes and works with state authorities, and of course that's where some depopulation and euthanization happens of these birds. But it's called high path for a reason. And so to me, it's completely misleading to say that the government killed 100 million chickens. No, the disease did, and the government, in trying to stop the disease from spreading, or the disease killed a portion of those in trying to stop the spread of that deadly virus, more birds were euthanized. And so it's misinformation. It's incorrect and kind of disappointing to hear BS like that.
Yeah, that would be an interesting week if there was a reality show following around the USDA chief veterinarian this week. That would have been fascinating. Just before I'll get the other panel's comments, but Kelvin, because you and I were kind of going back and forth about this, the decision to depopulate, who makes that decision? Like, how does that work? If I had a barn and we know that I've got an outbreak in my barn, who instructs me? Like, how do I know? Like, how does that work?
Developed countries around the world have a long-standing agreement where if there's a certain disease found, then in that flock, the flock is euthanized to stop the spread of that disease. These are the real bad diseases. This is how society has evolved to manage these outbreaks, and so it's something that is above any political decision. If highly pathogenic avian influenza is found in a flock, it's just standard procedure in all Western countries and elsewhere around the world that that flock then is put down. And again, in many cases, I know of some cases personally where 97% of the birds were dead within days from the virus, not from any government decision to cull or euthanize. And so it's something where I don't think we really want to go backwards as a society in terms of giving up on trying to stop awful viruses like this. So it's almost like she implied that the Trump administration is considering not having these depopulations happen when the disease is found, and that would be, to me, that's a major concern, especially as we're starting to see more serious human cases of avian influenza over the last couple months.
Yeah, big concern with the dairy industry, obviously as well. Tyler, I've described this is where populism and commercial agriculture kind of collide.
Yeah, and I think that it's one thing for, given kind of the focus, the efforts, the flare-ups, the divisions around COVID over the years to try and think that everything's like COVID. But the reality, while COVID did unfortunately cause deaths, it was a relatively mild virus in the grand scheme of these things. And in the livestock sector, you get things like HPAI. You have the potential for African swine fever. There's foot and mouth disease that's spreading around the world. Like these are very severe viruses that would cripple U.S. agriculture. Again, HPAI is having a devastating impact on the poultry industry in the United States. And these plans and strategies to control these diseases, I mean, ideally to prevent them, but if they're not prevented, to act on them and to eradicate them are developed in collaboration between governments and the industry and the value chain. Like this, there is a real collaborative effort because typically there's a broad recognition of the need and the benefit for these control measures and this effort to eradicate. If the Trump administration is going to back away from that shared desire to eradicate these diseases, like that's a really devastating consequences. And again, it's bad with HPAI, but what happens if African swine fever is found on a hog farm in the United States?
Yeah,
it's crazy to think that they wouldn't act quick.
And I'll go to Lyndsey here to wrap up, and I'm not sure that's actually what they're even suggesting. To me, I interpret this as sort of like providing the perception that we're investigating, we're doing something about this. At the end of the day, nothing really changes and nothing happens. That's my take, but I could be wrong.
There's an accusation. There's an accusation that the previous administration killed all these birds.
I know it is politicizing something that shouldn't be
So
full stop.
Yes, can we refer to the president's address after the air crash in Washington D.C. as well, politicizing something that is not something that I think personally should be politicized in any way, shape, or form. What worries me in this scenario is exactly that question of responsibility of, a government has to take responsibility for what is happening when it comes to their food supply, when it comes to protecting their livestock, when it comes to protecting their airspace, whatever the case may be. To me, my concern is that especially when it comes to some of these diseases, livestock, agriculture, etc., we need to focus on the responsibility here and not on the partisanship of some of these decisions. And I get that it's perhaps, as Shaun, as you call them, the showman, whatever, maybe that's, the fallback. But realistically, outside of all the glitz and glamour and sound bites, etc., real stuff has to happen on the farm, and real things like protecting our chickens, our turkeys, our etc., from highly pathogenic diseases. And misinformation does not help the situation at all. It is already really difficult to have a, open and honest and realistic discussion with someone when you have to say that, yes, these barns have to be depopulated to save other barns. It's already not a very palatable thing to talk about with consumers.
Right.
So we don't need the added, BS factor, as Kelvin puts it. Okay, I'll shut up.
At the end of there is compensation for the depopulation, right? And so the depopulation actually is probably the cheapest cost, because not doing the depopulation and the entire U.S. flock is wiped out, then what do you think is the cost to consumers? So it's actually, the depopulation is actually probably saving the taxpayer money on the front end. Sometimes your first cost is your best cost. Okay, we're out of time. For those of you listening to the RealAg Radio podcast, you're going to get an additional segment because it is very popular. So hang in there. So if you're listening on Rural Radio, make sure you download the podcast so you can hear the bonus segment. I want to thank Tyler McCann, Kelvin Heppner, and Lyndsey Smith for being on today's show. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Intruvix 2 herbicide from FMC. Intruvix 2 herbicide for cereals delivers outstanding pre-seed control of the toughest broadleaf weeds like kochia, volunteer canola, and narrow-leaved hawksbeard. See your local retailer today.
Welcome to the bonus part of the program for everybody, the exclusive version of our conversation for those of you that download the RealAg Radio podcast. We do appreciate it. And if you've been listening on Rural Radio 147, thanks for coming over here to the podcast as well. You can always provide your feedback and thoughts by sending us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And I guess one thing we didn't get to was the fact that PV Mart shutting down. Like, Target didn't survive. PV Mart's going. Toys R Us is on its last legs. We just can't have any retail fun here in Canada, Kelvin.
Yeah, I don't know what it is and what the breaking point was here for PV Mart. You mentioned Toys R Us. They actually had the same U.S. real estate services company invest in them back in December. The same company that's winding down Toys R Us stores across Canada also invested in PV Mart back in December. And yeah, here we are a month later, and all 90 locations this week, they confirmed that they entered creditor protection and are winding down, having sales what's the word? To get rid of all their inventory at
liquidation.
That's the word I'm looking for. Yes,
we still have that store, Liquidation World. We had one in Lethbridge.
It's a great question. I don't know.
It was like dollar store before the dollar store.
And that is the thing. This same week we saw Walmart announce $1 billion worth of investment in Canada in their stores across the country, and it's just interesting what's winning and what's losing on the retail scene in Canada.
Yeah, Walmart's winning. If you wanted insight on it, Walmart's winning.
Yeah, well, if I may, and maybe Tyler wants to weigh in on this one, but like PV Mart, sort of a strange, or tried to be sort of, this farm supply, but not, and kind of this strange little space. But I mean, personally, because we had one not far from us, it was chronically understocked. It didn't have terribly knowledgeable staff, and it was this weird sort of in between of like, is it agriculture? Is it not? And I don't know. I'm not terribly surprised. I know that most of the people I know who were like, I go to PV Mart when like the work clothes were all on clearance and could get super great deals. And that was about it. So what I have found surprising though, in my little area, so we are lucky to have, 3 different, actual farm supply focused on either feed mill, farm supply stores. And honestly, I think they have an opportunity here to swoop in and tell the world that, hey, if these are the things you were looking for, we have them, and we actually have knowledgeable staff too. So to me, there could be an opportunity here for some of these smaller independents that have been servicing, at least for us in this area anyway. I can't speak for other areas, but anyway, I'm not entirely surprised. It was never a fantastic store for most anything.
I haven't been in one, so I can't comment on that.
Well, that you are to blame then, because you did not support them.
Yeah. Lots of things to blame me for. I'll take credit for some of it, but I don't know about that one.
Okay.
What does perplex me is how, I think it's another example of how difficult the retail market is in Canada. Because of the population, and I don't even know if this is the cause, but it gets back to the kind of the grocery store discussion in terms of bringing more competition to the market. Because of how the population of Canada is placed, it doesn't allow for a central hub and spoke distribution system, and we struggle with. And like you look at I don't care, grocery stores just across the state line or the country line. On border states, and you look at the variety and the options that are at those small town grocery stores that are not in a big grocery store in Canada, in the city in Canada. And then Kelvin and I's favorite store, Shields, is a really good example. The variety that and don't tell me it's about a big city, because I'm talking about Fargo or Grand Forks or Great Falls, Montana. How do those places sustain the variety and the inventory that we would never be afforded in a Canadian store? That's the mystery, Kelvin, to me from a retail perspective.
100%, I agree, and I think the last time Tyler was actually on this panel, I missed that show because I was at a Shields store.
Yes,
that's
and
how Kelvin takes time off, is to go to Shields.
Yeah. But it's not that much of a mystery. It's people, right? There's more people in the United States. It's like a really
no.
North Dakota,
not in North Dakota and Montana.
But the critical mass around them to run those distribution centers that you talked about, right? So TFC, as the U.S. equivalent of PV Mart, is a really good example where they are able to maintain that critical mass to run a business in ways that you can't in Canada.
But also, why is Walmart expanding in Canada then? Right?
Because it's the one that's winning, and it's unfortunate because
the one, yeah.
Well, Amazon, although Amazon in Quebec, here's some more Quebec content for your listeners, is closing its distribution centers, laying off 5,000 workers because of effectively an effort to try and unionize the stores. But the landscape's changing, right? So we have a couple of farm supply stores here that are good if I need something right away. But the reality is, depending on what it is, I can get something shipped from Farmers Depot. I put the online order in, and the next day it's here through the mail, and like that has an impact where you've just got that ready supply of things, and again, often cheaper, even after you pay whatever $25 to get it shipped or something like that.
Alberta has 6 people per square kilometer. Montana has 7.7 people per square mile. Okay? Like, I don't...
That's not apples to apples, Sean.
Yeah,
I can't do that mental math. Can you fix that for me?
But again, you're comparing, these stores aren't just operating in Montana, right? That they've got a mass of stores across the country. They've got more heavily concentrated urban areas, and the landscape is just different.
Right. I mean, you do have to take into account that, like, just like, you know, you might have, like, the larger structures subsidizes some of the smaller ones, right? I mean, that would happen.
Okay,
but it doesn't explain the whole difference.
In the Shields example, though, I don't want to belabor this, but in the Shields example, the root of the company is in North Dakota, Grand Forks I think Fargo was the first store. It has only expanded to larger centers as of recently, like Denver, in Chandler, Arizona, and there's a new store in Dallas, Texas. I know way too much about the store.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, they're not even an advertiser.
The roots are in the Dakotas, in in the small, unpopulated states, yet still are afforded the opportunity for... They didn't start in Chandler or in Dallas. They've just got there. Like, so to me, I kind of don't understand it. I don't know if it...
But it's also, again, it's easier to do business in the United States.
Well, that's true.
It's easier to grow a business. Again, you've got interprovincial barriers that are set in place in Canada where it is hard to operate businesses across the country. And again, if we're going to throw numbers around, Sean, the population density in Canada is 4.2 people per square kilometer. In the United States, it's 36.
Yeah, but you're including LA and New York, and they
yeah, and I'm including the Canadian North and all of those things. But again, this is the problem with our numbers: is we can all pick numbers that help our stories out.
One other factor, I wonder whether this impacted timing here with PV Mart. Again, just for context, PV Mart is probably the largest farm supply, ranch supply, rural lifestyle store chain in Canada, right? I know that's what they claim in places, but I'm thinking it is. I can't think of another company that's bigger, just for American listeners trying to understand what we're talking about here. But I wonder whether the timing coming off of COVID and the pandemic turned a lot of people into backyard chicken farmers and rural lifestyle enthusiasts. And I think economics and cost of living has caught up with a lot of that. And I wonder whether there was a bit of a bubble that burst here over the last year or two in terms of demand from the suburban kind of rural lifestyle demand.
Except my understanding, based on some Bloomberg podcasts I listened to, is that TSC in the United States has grown through that bubble. Like, there is no bubble bursting. They seize that same opportunity, that same growth, the backyard chickens, all of those things.
But the U.S. economy has continued to do well, and Canada's has struggled. And then you add to it, you know, who knows what their debt load was, and so increasing interest rates, how much stuff comes in from the States potentially, and that would be at potentially the dollar has a factor there. So I think it's still a valid question of, or it's frankly just a reflection of what it's like to run a business on both sides of the border. And Canada's a tough place to run a business for a lot of big reasons.
Well, and I think it also is a statement, you know, to get back to the Shields example, is that Shields has not come to Canada. They have not opened a Winnipeg store.
That's because they want Shaun Haney to go to the States.
No, but I think it's kind of telling.
No, it's true.
No, it is. It is kind of telling because, you know, Lyndsey.
Yes.
During the show, I was disappointed. I thought because you and I chatted earlier this week, I thought you were really going to hammer down. You mentioned the interprovincial barriers and things that Canada can do, but you held back a little bit.
I did, and this is the bonus segment, so maybe I'll unleash. No, but it is one of the things, and we still have other things to mention on today's show, but it is one of the things when we talk about where Canada should help itself. One of them is on interprovincial trade. At the same time, it's not super simple, right? There are some things, though, that are. And so Trevor Toome wrote a really great column and has new research out that sort of talks about where there's productivity gains that Canada could make sort of with like overnight could do these things. Some of them I think are oversimplified, and interprovincial trade is one of them, because there is a reason we have inspections, etc. Do we need 3? Can we not find equivalency? Can we not? I think we can. So I'm not saying interprovincial trade just disappears overnight, but it is an ingrained added cost, because it is added time, it is added oversight, it is added administration that probably doesn't need to be there in most of the cases. In which case, if we want to be more productive, be more efficient, make more money, we should have fewer barriers to interprovincial trade. I'm not saying none, and I'm not saying it's an overnight thing. But
that's a dangerous game to play, Lyndsey, because if a lot of the supply managed folks didn't like some of the things said about 282 on this radio show, they would not like you advocating dismantling the interprovincial barriers that are contingent, that are core of that system operating. And so as much as we talk about getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers, we really need to understand what we're talking about. And, some things like permitting and whatnot are easy, but in agriculture, they're often far more complicated than we make them out to be. And we talk too lightly about just getting rid of them without real consequences.
Well,
hold on.
But maybe we need to, Tyler. I'm not saying it's not complicated, but maybe it has to happen. So
yes, that's great. But so again, if your provincial marketing boards and supply management are going to get rid of their provincial quotas and are going to allow that product to freely move across the country, great. That is a good interprovincial barrier to get rid of, but that completely changes the way that the supply management system operates. So if you understand the differences, but if you understand the differences between,
you just deal with the supply management.
If you understand the differences on the meat inspection, right? Meat inspection is often something people go to, right? The way that the rules work internationally is that effectively the lowest kind of standard that you accept as a government, as a national government, you have to accept from another country. And there are some provinces where there are no provincial meat inspection standards. And so if we're just going to let meat from a provincially inspected slaughterhouse move across provincial boundaries, that significantly impacts our ability to ensure that imported meat meets high Canadian standards too. So you can say that
that's not
a plant in Lloydminster should.
That's not insurmountable.
It is not anywhere near as easy, Lyndsey, as people make it out to be. There's significant effort for years spent to try and find ways around these things. And it's not as easy as people make it out to be. So it's one thing to talk about all of this great, we're going to boost GDP by 4% by removing interprovincial trade barriers. But I look forward to people offering kind of detailed solutions for how you actually do this, because too often it's too easy to talk at a high level about these things and then the details screw you.
Sure, but you also have to have people in place that are actually willing to sit down and try and do it in good faith. And frankly, we have incredibly strong provinces who don't want to have freer interprovincial trade because they might have to do things they don't want to do. So, and that's my point, Tyler, is that it isn't just as easy as waving a wand and it all gets done. But at the same time, you have to have people willing to do it, and it potentially is something that needs to happen.
Like if we figure that stuff out,
we can. Doesn't mean we will.
But so this is something a bit of a kind of a hobby horse of ours at CAPI's, is that the FPT agreement that is kind of core to how agriculture policy in this country works is broken, and it's been in place effectively now for 25 years. The way that agriculture works has changed pretty significantly, and the FPT agreement hasn't. But the biggest barrier to change is provincial governments that are not interested in doing anything differently. And so what you get is everything getting worse, not better. And I think we wanted to come to this. Off-CAF, which the federal government topped up, is a really good example of something that really should not be done by the federal government. The provinces should be doing on-farm programming, but the provinces weren't seen to be doing a very good job of it, so the federal government stepped into it. I think it was quite a contrast this week to see the federal government putting money into off-CAF environmental programming at the same time as the provincial government in Ontario was putting $100 million into risk management programming. I think that there's a clear sign of the different understandings around what the priority needs of the sector are in those two announcements. But really, if we had provinces stepping up and showing more leadership and willing to be a little bit more ambitious in the things that they should be responsible for, and equally the federal government respecting provincial jurisdiction too, we get to better outcomes. But at the end of the day, leadership's lacking in this country.
Okay, well, so
can we just, I just want to point out, because I feel like it's important that there was an election called here in Ontario on Wednesday. So the risk management program, the 100 million, an added 100 million, so it brings it up to 250 million. The 100 million is over the next 3 years, by the way, for Ontario producers for the risk management programming here in Ontario. But yes, squeaked it through day before an election called. Just want to put that out there. Also, it was the same day that I received my thank you checks from the provincial government. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to call them, but they arrived in the mail the same day that the election was called. So yes, February 27th, right? Ontario goes to the polls. So welcome everybody. It'll be great times.
Well, and the White House has released a statement saying Reuters' report on tariffs are false. So I'll leave that right there.
In the span of this show, you guys, that's what has happened.
What the heck is our headline going to be in the email tomorrow morning?
I think Tyler's hair has just turned white from the stress of the.
Again, I'm not a food processor in this country trying to figure out if I can keep my business afloat.
Right?
But I have a lot of sympathy for those that do.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that more people paid more attention to those issues. And I wish that farmers understood the important role that food processors play. And I wish that governments understood that food manufacturing is the largest manufacturing sector in this country. And they need to pay more attention to it too.
Not auto. Anyway, so.
Oh, if I'm in the auto sector, I am honestly all of this. I don't care if I was running a business or I was a worker. The level of stress here, the uncertainty is.
But to Tyler's point is that we are in agriculture, and frankly, it's kind of the same in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah,
right. But just perhaps more fragmented, less concentrated in one area, kind of thing.
Well, here's what's interesting to me is I've had numerous conversations going back to maybe late November, early December when all this tariff stuff kind of started. And I've had numerous conversations with farmers that are like, I'm kind of glad I'm insulated from this. And then you start to ask a few questions and you're like, dude, you're not insulated.
No, none of us are.
There's a perception that you're insulated, but you're not really insulated. Right?
Like certain sectors will be hit probably sooner or more immediately.
Yeah.
Or more directly, but ultimately overall it's not good news for any of us.
Livestock producers were definitely more concerned.
Look at the hog industry.
I don't want to exaggerate that. They were I think in the story I said slightly more concerned. They showed more concern. I wouldn't
in the CFSI.
But it was more concern.
It's interesting when you look at the processed food trade stats. We have a surplus in beef exports to the United States. So we're exporting more beef to the U.S. than we're importing to Canada. But it's a good example of that market, that value chain that works together, because a lot of that beef that's going south are started off as American calves these days.
Our feeder cows.
Coming into Canada, getting fed out, getting slaughtered, and the meat's going back there. So, you can get hung up on, people can dwell on specific numbers, but you really need to understand kind of the bigger picture. And again, the bigger picture is we're better together.
Of course we are. Yeah, 100%. Kelvin, go ahead.
Just a personal anecdote here. I shared a picture on Twitter from our kids' hockey practice last night. We practiced in a rink on a border, basically on the couple 100 feet from the Canada-U.S. border. And in the rink, there's a Canada, like most rinks in Canada, there's a Canada and U.S. flag in the rink, and I usually don't notice it, but last night, as we were getting all the updates again, with every twist and turn in this story on what's happening with the tariffs, I noticed the flag side by side, and it made me think of the kids on the ice. I did a quick survey. I think the majority of the kids on that hockey team have parents that are employed in businesses that rely on multi-generation long relationships in the U.S. And so those businesses are definitely feeling this risk, and it's something that's actually hard to believe. It feels surreal that we're in a moment where those businesses could be at risk, and layoffs are potentially on the table here in the coming months if 25% tariffs are a reality on these businesses. And it's hard to believe.
Yeah,
and it's hard not to take it personally, right? Like I don't understand how Canada's the bad guy. Like, tariff the heck out of China if you want, right? Like, there are real serious issues with what the Chinese are doing.
This is my argument on AgriTalk today. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If this is really about China, look at a map of the world and the countries where China or Russia have become dominant in the last decade, and you're left with a few countries that the U.S. is picking fights with right now. You're left with Canada and Mexico and Europe and some Asian countries. And that's where this is so bewildering and frustrating, and probably contributed to my grumpiness this week in terms of
exactly. But to that point, realistically, it comes down to, and Tyler pointed this out when I said, this is who America chose, right? This is the leadership that America has chosen. This is the path America wants to go down. Tyler corrects me and says, no, only half. But I really do hope from the side of the American people, because the American people are going to feel impacts too, and are going to feel impacts from this. I don't pretend to think that we can extract pain on the U.S. economy enough to make them change their mind. But I think the very real people impact, this is actually really important to talk about. And I hope that exactly that, Kelvin, that, the actual people who their everyday will be impacted by this in the U.S. as well and in Canada, I hope that actually gets people talking about this and saying, like, there has to be a better way to do this. You can want good things for America and not have to punish one of your best friends. Like, that is possible. So let's work on these things. It's what we've been doing.
Tyler gave the potash example, and I think it just comes down to choices. Like, okay, by doing this, and say there's a 25% tariff on potash, you're essentially making a choice that you prefer to plug the Midwest with potash from Russia and Belarus.
Yeah,
there's only one other place to get it.
Crazy.
In that kind of quantity and quality. So that's the decision. If that's what you're choosing to go, it's pretty apparent.
And again, like, if there are serious issues, like if you are concerned about fentanyl at the border or immigration, understand that the Canadian government's announced $1 billion new commitments. There are Black Hawk helicopters flying today over the border that were not flying before. Understand that the Canadian government has made serious efforts and is continuing to make efforts to increase defense spending. Understand that if it is about kind of USMCA and those rules, that there's an openness and a willingness to renegotiate that earlier. Like, I think that there's a genuine effort being made on the part of Canada to fix some of the things that we've not done right over a long time. And the fact that none of that seems to be worth anything, and the relationship wants to get blown up by the Americans, is just really hard to wrap your head around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Probably should
I have work. I have work to do. Apparently, we have to write 3 versions of tomorrow's email.
I have to do RealAg on the weekend for Ralco for Saturday afternoon at 4. Like, what am I going to say?
So things happened, and then they happened again, and now we don't know what's true.
Like,
welcome to the next.
This seems like a working weekend. I'm just anyway. Lots to think about and write about, and hey, really appreciate the panel. Thanks so much. That was a lively test of the audience's ability to decipher sarcasm. Appreciate that.
I was going to say, Shaun, that I think that Kelvin and I may have different politics, but we share a similar commitment to Canadian agriculture and to the future of the 6th sector. So,
Issues Panel, bringing people together here. It's good.
kumbaya. I just want to say to whoever's still listening, thank you for that.
Lots are listening. Our podcast downloads the past 3 weeks.
I know.
It's like a rocket ship.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Hey, everybody, if you have any feedback, send me that email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Also, call the RealAg feedback line. Love to hear your voice and your emotion and passion around some of these topics. 855-776-6147. Next week, traveling to, where am I going? Cambridge on Tuesday, Regina on Wednesday, and Camrose on Thursday.
You lucky duck.
Wow.
And Lyndsey.
Yeah, I'm going to San Antonio.
Right.
Going to Texas for the first time ever. Never been. Going to go see the Alamo. If you're going to be at CattleCon, find me. I'm on the app.
I heard on the beef market update earlier, I was warning Anne about making sure she doesn't get you out too late going to Howl at the Moon.
We're going to have a very good time. I've never met Anne Wasko in person. I'm very excited.
Which is amazing to me.
I know. It's bizarre. Anyway, she's my snuffleupagus.
We got to run because I got to head. I'm going to Tucson. I got to watch the opening weekend of college baseball for my oldest son, Div 2 baseball. The UMary Marauders are in Tucson this weekend, playing against a couple Colorado teams. So looking forward to that. But Kelvin's close to he's right close to the border. I'm going to like the root of it all. I'm like 45 minutes from the Mexican border.
Where are your Canadian flag, Shaun?
Fox News was at the Coots border earlier this week. My parents saw Fox News there, and there was RCMP all over. It was quite the show. It was
quite something.
Dad showed.
Alrighty.
Okay, cheers everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, bye.